We fucked up.
People can't afford to live, people can't afford gas, people can't afford food, people can't afford rent. The cost of living has gone up within these past 4 years, and I think that everyone here has been a victim of that.
In the future, I want to be able to own a home. And when he was president, the prices were a lot lower, especially for home buyers. And that is a huge issue for me. I want to be able to own my own home. I want to be able to start a family at an affordable cost.
I like the no tax on tips and no tax on overtime. I'm a big fan of lowering taxes personally. And in high school, I worked jobs that I earned money through tips. So that would have been able to help me save a lot more for college. And I think that would have helped me out a lot more in the long run.
I'm a big Christian, and I feel like that's the most important thing. And if the country is led towards righteousness and goodness, then we're going to be in a good place. And if it's not, which I believe that Kamala Harris would bring us all the way down and sink us and make us corrupt, we're not going to be able to get out of it.
Well, all of us farmers have officially fucked around, and we have officially found the fuck out now, guys. I am on the verge of bankruptcy. I'm on the verge of fucking tears. Overnight, all of my fucking help fled. My help, out of fear for their safety, their lives, they fucking fled. And now I am left out here standing in my unharvested carrot field. It is January, and I'm in Kansas, and this is when carrot harvest goes in fucking Kansas. This field should be full of workers, but all my fucking workers left. And who the fuck do you think is to blame for that? Every single one of them left. Now I have to by myself try to fill that truck with a load of fucking carrots in one day, and I can't do that, guys. I have to get these fucking carrots to market by next week, or my contract is fucking terminated. This is $936,000 worth of carrots right here, and I can't fucking pick them by myself. If they're unharvested, I will get kicked out of that contract, and I will get sued by the fucking Planters Loves Carrots company for that fucking money. But I have nobody that'll come fucking pick my carrots. Fuck, we are so fucking cooked, farmers.
So Americans are fed up with the cost of living in America. And if you think I'm playing, check this out.
Society is a fucking scam. So you wake up early in the morning to go to work to pay for a house that you're never at. And you pay for a car that primarily gets you from and to work, correct? The government takes anywhere from, let's say 30 to 50% of your wages. And then there's things like VAT, which is basically your money getting taxed that was already taxed. You save up your whole life for a pension, which at the end of the day, the government takes 40 to 50% of that. Then in your elder years, you're living off canned soup and fucking bread because that's all you can afford. And then you get your state pension, which you can't get until you're like 180 years old. And even with that, if you die before you get it, you can't even pass it down to your kids. The government takes it. We are all getting scammed so fucking bad. It's almost comical. People don't see this shit. How can you work 40 or 50 hours a week, especially nowadays, to pay for fucking nothing? So figure 200 hours a month, you give your life to a corporation. And then halfway through the month, you're struggling to get to payday. Sounds pretty fucking familiar, doesn't it? We're giving our lives away for nothing. It is a scam. We're losing more by going to work than staying our asses home. All a big scam. It's called the American dream because you have to be asleep to believe it.
Why, oh why do poor white people vote against themselves time and time again? They vote for Trump and the other MAGA politicians only to have every promise broken, prices go up, social supports evaporate. Here's why. First, remember what I talked about recently, the psychological wage of whiteness. That term was coined by W.E. Du Bois to describe poor white folks being paid with social status rather than decent living conditions. They're convinced by the elites that they're better than black folks, better than immigrants, Latinos, LGBTQ folks. They're convinced that being white puts them in the same league as the elites. Of course, the elites know otherwise, but the poor whites buy it because they're grasping at straws. Second, they are convinced that the people they're supposedly better than are the big threat in their lives. Not the rich, not the corporations or the politicians, but immigrants, black folks, welfare queens, LGBTQ, criminals, you know, the usual scapegoats. Third, the elites promise protection to poor white folks. A politician comes along and says, I'll keep those people in their place, or I'll kick them out, or I'll lock them up. Or, more politely, I'll defend your values. They don't say, I'll make your life better. Well, they say it, they just don't mean it. They'll say, I'll make sure they don't get ahead of you. Fourth, they vote for the punishment, not the policy. When a law gets passed that slashes public housing or school funding or food aid, they think, good, that'll stop those lazy freeloaders. And they do some mental gymnastics that make them believe it's worth losing those things for their own families in order to see those problematic black people and immigrants and so forth being punished. It gets to a point where just seeing those guys being punished is reward enough, which is pretty sick, but that's how behavior works. Their housing, schools, and groceries are on the chopping block too, but they blame that on Biden. Always a scapegoat. They get hit by the same policies they were told would punish the others, and they blame the wrong people. The system fails them, but they've been trained to blame the scapegoats, not the cause, which is the rich people, the people they voted for. So they think the problem is still those people, not the fact that they were personally manipulated by the people they voted for. They're basically saying, I'll take the hit as long as you don't help them, or worse, as long as you hurt them. That is the psychological wage Du Bois was talking about, the trade-off between material security for racial status. And that's a crying shame, folks. One share, like, save, and comment shows that you care about white people taking responsibility for racism in America. This work is important to me, and I want to keep doing it. If you want to support me, consider a donation of any size to coffee.com/Kelly Snyder. And yeah, spelling is important. Get curious.
I'm so sick of Democrats calling me a bigot just because I voted for Trump. I voted for his economic policies, not like the bad stuff.
Well, if you voted for him, you voted for all his policies. That's how it works. It's not really a buffet.
I was just sick of all the out-of-control spending by the Dems. Republicans are better for the economy. What? They are.
Facts over feelings, though, right?
Duh.
The U.S. economy has historically done much better under Democratic presidents than Republican ones. I'm serious. On average, since the end of World War II, real GDP has grown about 4.3% under Democrats and 2.5% under Republicans. 10 of the last 11 recessions happened under Republican presidents.
Yeah, because they inherited a bad economy from the Democrats before them.
Ooh, let's definitely come back to that one. But in terms of jobs, total job growth averaged roughly 2.5% per year under Democratic presidents and just over 1% for Republican presidents.
Okay, but plenty of people have made a lot of money under Trump, so I would probably check those numbers.
I always check the numbers, but you're right. There are plenty of people who have made a lot of money under Trump. Not regular people, but billionaires, for sure. Under his 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the wealth of U.S. billionaires jumped 77%. $2.2 trillion in the years following. Must be nice. And now, according to the CBO, the top 10% of families in the U.S. control about 60% of the nation's total wealth, while the bottom half of families hold just over 6%. Now, you said Republicans do worse because they inherit a bad economy from Democratic presidents.
Yeah.
No. The historical data shows that Democrats often inherit a weaker economy and leave a stronger one. Republicans inherit a stronger economy and leave a weaker one. The economy doesn't just happen. It responds to leadership, policy, timing. And Democrats simply have a stronger record.
Are the Penguins gay?
I don't know.
After all this talk about Somalians and millions of our taxpayer dollars being wasted, I truly think Americans are fed up at this point. To the point now where they're talking about literally going on a tax strike. Listen, I'm all for it. Because look around you, everything is fraud. Trump's met with Netanyahu already for the 5th time, while we keep sending billions to Ukraine and Israel, and my generation can't buy a house. Like ever. And these boomers will laugh in your face and say, work harder. The GOP would rather raise the retirement age to 70 than just enforce immigration law. And before anyone says anything, I voted for Trump. I supported him. It's about to be the end of 2025, and here's what people are noticing. No high-profile arrests, no mass deportations, Epstein files redacted, crime and inflation is out of control. Americans are told by the president that we don't have talent while H-1B visas are replacing us, funding wars we didn't vote for, and we get mocked by a country the size of New Jersey in the Middle East daily. We've had Trump for 1 full year in office. So yeah, people are talking about tax strikes, because taxes are a scam. If you don't pay, they take everything from you, your assets, your freedom, your life. But if you steal millions, if you traffic people, if you commit fraud, nothing happens. Americans are tired of being law-abiding for a country that doesn't enforce its own laws. It doesn't even matter who's in office anymore. Both sides are owned, both sides are playing us, and they're still counting on us to not do anything about it. That's why they're sloppy now, that's why they don't care, and we keep paying taxes to PDFs. Not anymore.
So while we as Americans can't afford healthcare or life-saving medications that we need, and we can't afford rent, and none of us can find a job, the Trump administration is talking about giving direct payments upwards of $100,000 to every single individual in Greenland to try and persuade them to join the U.S.
I realize most women who voted for Donald Trump don't think we're going to get a national abortion ban. They don't understand that tariffs are put on U.S. citizens, not on China, and that will mean skyrocketing prices for us at home. They don't understand that their taxes are going to go up because they make under $3 million a year. They don't understand that Project 2025 wants to do away with no-fault divorce, contraceptives. It wants to make those smutty romance novels you read a crime to possess. I know most of you thought uncritically that when you voted for Trump, you were going to have more financial security and prosperity, that you were going to see the greatness of America restored. But what you thought you were voting for is not what you're going to get. And the reality of who you put in control of our nation is going to become startlingly apparent to you over the next several months. And I hope you get every single thing that you actually voted for. I hope you experience all of it.
Trump won the 2024 election driven largely by Americans' view on the economy. I'm an economist and I specialize in federal policy. What do I make of all this? I have, I think, 3 things to say immediately. 1, the problem that Trump tapped into, the anger he was able to capitalize in being ushered back into the presidency, it is a problem that is so much bigger than inflation for 2 years. It is a 5-decade stagnation and decline in American living standards. It's not just 12 months of inflation or 18 months of inflation. It is a structural failing of our economy, and he tapped into it and made it very palpable for Americans, as did inflation. The second thing is that however deep or big that problem is, he is probably not going to solve it or even address it at all. I mean, he's good at tapping into anger, but he doesn't have economic policy solutions for what is driving the problems that most Americans are facing. So that means, my third thing, that the future is whoever can build the solution, right? Democrats lost the election, but they can still win the problem if they can come up with a set of solutions that will actually address it. Americans have told us how angry they are about certain aspects of the economy. Trump isn't going to fix it. The policies that he's articulated don't even come close to addressing it, which means we have to identify the solutions to build a better economy. We have to make people feel empowered that they can fix their economy. One of the most striking exit poll numbers that I saw on this NBC review was just how high a share of Americans think that the best days of America are behind us. I have a very small platform, which is like me and my hostage-like situation closet, and I have a column for Bloomberg, but to the extent I have that platform, I will use it to make Americans feel like the best is yet to come, because there are so many economic policy solutions that we simply have not pursued. We won't pursue them over the next 4 years, but we can do it in the future, and I want to use my space to talk about it. So first, what is the decline in American living standards, this economic problem that Trump tapped into? So the short version is American wage growth for the bottom 50% of Americans has not been high enough to maintain the same standard of living that they had before for certain key goods. So from 1973 to 2023, this is a 5-decade period, over a lot of presidencies, a lot of Democrat and Republican swings in power, the net wage growth, real wage growth, right? This is wage growth net of inflation. The real wage growth of the bottom 50% was $3, meaning if they made $10.50 in 1973, workers at a similar place in the distribution made $13.50 in 2023. It's a $3 increase in wages over prices. That's next to nothing. That means that for the bottom half of Americans, their wage has barely kept up with inflation for almost 5 decades. Now, in terms of living standards, right? Living standards aren't a monolith. If your wage keeps up with inflation, you can afford things whose price is slower than inflation overall. And we have a lot of goods in the US whose price grows slower than inflation overall. Appliances, electronics, TVs, smartphones, computers, clothing, household furniture, a lot of like recreational consumption, like books and music and movies, those have all grown much slower than prices overall. And so that's a living standard that has improved for a lot of Americans. You know, even cars have grown a lot slower than prices overall, kind of up into this last spike of inflation. So people can have more cars, they can have smartphones and TVs and tablets and household furniture and appliances, and they can afford all of that more. That living standard has increased. What they can't afford are the goods whose prices rise faster than inflation. And these are the big ones: housing, healthcare, childcare, college tuition. All of these rise much faster than prices overall, which means that even as Americans are maybe able to afford more consumer goods on average, they're not able to afford these kind of hallmark American goods like a house. Well, this is a 5-decade problem, and it has a lot of like variation within these 5 decades. Some years, some eras are better than others. Well, during the inflation spike of 2021, it basically pushed kind of this 5-decade simmering problem to the edge. Food, which had been, basically price for food has grown with the price of inflation overall for most of the period I'm talking about. It jumps above inflation. And all of a sudden you have American households who maybe had grown accustomed to the fact that they couldn't afford housing, or they couldn't afford healthcare, or they can't afford childcare, and suddenly they can't afford food. It was such an acute realization, such a breaking point moment for a problem that has been going on for so long. It was basically like an economic bill that came due during Biden's administration. I mean, for the record, I think Biden did a pretty remarkable job considering we didn't fall into a recession. But I also know that that's really cold comfort to tell people like, oh, you can't afford your life anymore, but hey, at least we're not in recession. Like, you can't tell people to feel better that it's not worse when they already feel bad enough. So that is a very real economic problem. And voters told us in 2024, that it is salient for them, and that however long it's been cooking, it's salient now. Well, that is a pretty intense economic problem, and 5 decades of stagnating wage growth and a price kind of not out of control, but prices increasing for goods like housing, healthcare, childcare, college tuition. Those aren't like necessarily quick fixes. But I think my second take would be, however deep this problem goes, however upset Americans are about it, I don't think Trump's going to do much about it, because he hasn't articulated any policy that gets to the root of the problem, either how much those things cost or how much Americans earn. The deportation policy and the tariff policy, I don't even really give those the dignity of being an economic policy. He has found that Americans enjoy blaming people. It's a pretty natural instinct. He's able to capitalize on it well. And like right now, everything is China and immigrants' fault. And so we've designed policy to be, deliver retribution to them. They have economic consequences, but they're not economic policy. And I think he'll make a show of pursuing them. It'll cause some problems, and he'll be like, well, they won't let me do it anymore. Something like that. Rile up his base, but not actually pursue them. The one policy that he is guaranteed to pursue is a tax cut, because he cut taxes in 2017. Most of the tax cut is going to expire on the household side. And so now he wants to renew the tax cuts that he passed. This will not help Americans. And if you think that that's a crazy statement, let me remind you, we have cut taxes on trillions of dollars of levels in 2001, 2003, 2012, and 2017. Is the 2025 tax cut going to solve all the problems that those prior 4 did not? I mean, we have spent over $8 trillion on reducing taxes for Americans. And you know what? They can't afford housing. They can't afford childcare. They can't afford food. We can blame these things on the inflation that took place under Biden, but these tax cuts did nothing to help the living standards of Americans, because you cannot change the trajectory of living standards. You cannot radically improve Americans' living standards through a tax cut. You have to build policy around addressing problems, and tax cuts simply don't do it. But we're probably going to spend another $4 trillion on them, because that's how much his tax cut is supposed to cost. That's what the estimates are right now, which means we'll have invested $12 trillion over a 25-year period into a proven non-solution for the economic problems that Americans have said very clearly is what is important to them right now. Politicians and politics will change Americans' view on the economy. If you're a Democrat, you're happier when a Democrat's in office. When you're a Republican, you're happier when a Republican's in office. But this problem will not go away, even if Americans are less angry about it once he's in there. Tax cuts aren't going to do it. They're going to cost a lot of money, and they're going to fail to solve the problem, as they have failed to solve the problem on 4 prior occasions. And we are going to arrive at the same place. Just a different version of the same place in 4 years. The last thing I want to say, while I have the time to say it, is that we have great policy solutions that America has not put in place that can help Americans. It requires paying for them. It requires an investing in them. But I think more than anything, it requires Americans believing that they could be effective. And that is what I will do in this platform, is talk about these policy solutions, talk about positive ways forward to help people feel empowered about what America can accomplish. We've shown that we can make Americans angry. So now let's make Americans optimistic about what they can achieve in their own economic security. That is what I will do here. That is my third takeaway from the election. I hope you follow me and you can kind of come along on this journey as we talk through what the problems are in America and how we can solve them. It won't come out of the next administration, but that doesn't mean it won't come at all. We can build a better future. We can absolutely build a better future.
There's a haunting question that hangs over the American experiment, a question that liberal pundits ask with a tone of condescending shock after every election. Why? Why do millions of struggling working class Americans vote for a billionaire who lives in a gold tower? Why do they align with a man whose primary legislative achievement was a tax cut designed by and for his own class? Why do they excuse behavior in him that they would punish in their own children? And why do they seem to hate the teacher and the journalist more than the CEO who shipped their job overseas? The standard answers we're given are lazy. We're told they've been duped or that they're simply voting on hate. But if we really want to understand the reality of our country right now, we have to go deeper than that. We have to look at the neurology of shame, the sociology of waiting in line, and the absolute catastrophic failure of our political system to offer a stable home to the people it claims to represent. To understand the Trump voter, you first have to understand the pain of admitting you're trapped. Psychologists call this system justification theory. When a human being is stuck in a rigged system, it's psychologically devastating to admit that the game is fixed and you're losing. I talked a little bit about this in my Fear series. It creates a profound sense of helplessness. To cope, the human mind performs a trick. It rationalizes the status quo. It says, the system is fair, I'm just in a slump. Political psychologists like John Jost have shown that people often defend systems that disadvantage them because it protects their sense of order and meaning. John Steinbeck once famously observed that socialism never took root in America because the poor do not see themselves as an exploited class, but as temporarily embarrassed millionaires. That line, whether perfectly sourced or not, captures a cultural truth. Americans are taught to see themselves not as stuck, but as pre-success. This is where Trump enters the national psyche. He isn't seen by his base as the elite. He's seen as the avatar of their fantasy. He's the lottery ticket that hit. He's brash, he's golden, he answers to no one, and he walks and talks like a guy who got away with breaking every rule they resent. To the man working 2 shifts at an Amazon warehouse, attacking Trump's wealth feels like attacking his own imagined future. They're not voting to protect their current bank account. They're voting to protect the bank account they believe they are destined to have. He represents what sociologists call aspirational identification, the tendency to side with the figure you hope to become, not the one you are now. But a fantasy alone is not enough to drive a movement. you also need a villain, and the Democratic Party, particularly from the 1990s onward, volunteered for that role. Under the banner of the Third Way, Democrats made a calculated pivot. They moved away from being the party of the factory floor and became the party of the professional managerial class: lawyers, consultants, tech leaders, and highly educated professionals. They traded union dues for corporate PAC money. They championed free trade agreements, financial deregulation, and welfare cuts that many working class communities experienced as abandonment rather than modernization. In doing so, they fundamentally changed their language. To a worker in the Rust Belt, the Democratic Party stopped sounding like a union rep fighting for their wages and started sounding like an HR department policing their behavior. When you're struggling to buy eggs and the party of the left is lecturing you on structural equity while attending fundraisers with the same financial interest buying up your town, you don't feel represented, you feel managed. Political scientists describe this as the diploma divide, the split between voters with college degrees and those without, where education now predicts partisan loyalty more than income does. To the working class, the elite is no longer just the guy who signs the paycheck. The elite is the person who corrects their grammar, mocks their religion, and tells them which words make them a bad person. This is why the class war in America feels flipped upside down. It's no longer simply the poor versus the rich. It is the uncredentialed versus the credentialed, right? Sociological work on status resentment shows that cultural disrespect now hits as hard as a pay cut. Trump attacks the people his base feels judged by. When he mocks a journalist, a professor, a scientist, or a bureaucrat, he's not just being rude. He's effectively saying, these people think they're better than you. I'm showing you they're weak. It's emotional revenge in real time. This psychological dynamic helps explain why his supporters excuse behavior that liberals find appalling. To his base, the bad behavior is the proof of his authenticity. In a world of polished teleprompter reading politicians who speak in focus grouped platitudes, Trump's lack of filter signals that he's not owned. Right? Social psychologists sometimes call this performative authenticity, the idea that violating norms publicly is taken as evidence of being real and independent. When he says something shocking or cruel, it triggers a thought process in his supporters that says, only someone who is truly free would dare to say that. His rudeness is interpreted as strength. His chaos is interpreted as disruption of a corrupt order. It also taps into the power of vicarious retribution. If you feel humiliated by the system, seeing your champion humiliate the system feels like justice. Every time he owns the libs or breaks a norm, it delivers a small dopamine hit of borrowed status to those who feel left behind. It's revenge by proxy, and that doesn't make the cruelty acceptable. It explains why the cruelty reads as cathartic to the people cheering. However, we can't ignore the hardest, most essential part of this conversation, the friction of social progress. Sociologist Arlie Hochschild describes the deep story of the American right as a feeling of standing in a line, waiting for the American dream, while the line barely moves. Your feet hurt, you're tired. Suddenly you see people cutting in line ahead of you, minorities, immigrants, women, queer people, people who were once kept at the back. And who's waving them through? The government, the media, the universities. When the working class hears discussions about reparations, DEI initiatives, or expanding protections for immigrants and marginalized groups, they often do not see justice, they see displacement. Political psychology research calls this status threat or racial status threat, when a dominant group experiences increased equality as a loss rather than a gain. When you're used to being at the center of the story, equality does not feel like fairness, it feels like a demotion. The growing pains of finally recognizing the rights and voices of people of color, immigrants, and queer communities can feel to some struggling white voters like an active attack on their own survival. Trump exploits this brilliantly. He validates the line cutter narrative. He tells them explicitly or implicitly, you're not failing because you aren't working hard, you're failing because they're taking what's yours. Then that story transfers the shame of poverty and precarity away from the self and onto a scapegoat. It's a powerful, addictive psychological relief, and it's incredibly dangerous. All of these factors culminate in a sociological state known as anomie, we talked about before, a sense of normlessness where the social contract feels broken and rules no longer make sense. Anomie creates a special kind of desperation that makes people more willing to take risks. If you're comfortable, you vote for stability. If you feel anomie, if you feel like the system is a burning building, you don't vote for the firefighter, you vote for the arsonist. You vote for the guy who promises to burn it all down, even if you might get burned in the process. The tragedy of this moment isn't only that a billionaire con man won working class loyalty, it's that millions of people were left so exposed that his cruelty could feel like protection instead of a warning siren. The modern left has poured enormous energy into defending the humanity of immigrants, queer and trans people, and communities of color, often against a movement that treats other people's pain as entertainment. It's not irrational for progressives to be done handing out infinite benefit of the doubt to those who cheer that on. There's a real and justified moral exhaustion on that side that keeps trying to hold the line against open dehumanization. But refusing to excuse is not the same as refusing to understand. And understanding how shame gets weaponized, how status anxiety becomes racial threat, how enemy makes people reach for the arsonist. That's not about giving anyone a pass. It's about denying authoritarians the raw materials they need. If we don't map the emotional machinery, we leave it running in the dark, and it will be used again and again. So the task is not to meet everyone in some warm, shared emotional middle. The task is colder and more disciplined. To see clearly how people are being played, to take their material and emotional injuries seriously without normalizing the cruelty done in their name, and to rebuild a politics where dignity is not something you have to steal from someone else to feel. As long as that machinery runs unchecked, as long as shame can be so easily redirected into rage at the vulnerable instead of accountability for the powerful, there will always be another arsonist ready to light the match. I'll see you next time.